The desert wind carried whispers of an ancient agreement as Jake Iron Horse Morrison rode toward the Apache settlement, his leather chaps creaking against the saddle with each powerful stride of his stallion. The sun blazed overhead like a merciless judge, casting long shadows across the red earth that seemed to pulse with secrets older than memory. Nikka stood at the edge of her tribe's camp, her obsidian eyes following the approaching rider with the stillness of a mountain cat. The beaded leather dress clung to her bronze skin like morning dew on desert flowers, and her long black hair danced in the wind like smoke from a sacred fire. She had known this day would come, the day when her father's debt to the white rancher would be collected. Chief Running Bear emerged from his teepee, his weathered face carved with the weight of difficult decisions. The drought had lasted 3 moons, and his people's survival depended on access to the rancher's water wells. The price had been negotiated in the old way. Honor for honor, life for life, daughter for protection. The Pale Rider comes to claim what was promised, the chief announced, his voice carrying across the camp like thunder rolling through canyon walls. Jake dismounted with fluid grace, his spurs jingling a metallic song against the hard-packed earth. His hat cast shadows across steel-gray eyes that had seen too much violence and not enough tenderness. The holstered Colt at his hip spoke of a man who took what he wanted and protected what was his. "Chief," Jake nodded, removing his hat to reveal sun-bleached hair. "I've come for the girl as agreed." Nikka felt her heart gallop like wild mustangs, but her face remained as serene as still water. She had been raised to honor her father's word, even when it meant surrendering her freedom to this mysterious rancher whose reputation preceded him like storm clouds. "My daughter understands the sacred nature of our agreement," Chief Running Bear said, placing a protective hand on Nikka's shoulder. "She goes willingly, as befits a warrior's daughter." Jake's eyes met Nikka's across the space between worlds, his civilized brutality and her wild innocence creating a tension thick enough to cut with a Bowie knife. Something primal stirred in the depths of his chest, a hunger he hadn't felt since his wife's death 5 winters ago. "I'll treat her with respect," Jake promised, though his voice carried undertones that made Nikka's pulse quicken like hummingbird wings. As she gathered her few possessions, a medicine pouch, her grandmother's silver bracelet, and a doe-skin dress for special occasions, Nikka wondered what kind of man this rancher truly was. The stories spoke of his iron will and quick draw, but also of his loneliness that echoed through his vast ranch like a wolf's howl. The moment arrived like sunset, inevitable and transformative. Nikka approached Jake's horse, her bare feet silent on the desert floor. When he extended his hand to help her mount, the contact sent lightning through both their bodies. His calloused palm against her smooth skin created a connection that transcended the business arrangement between their peoples. "Ready?" Jake asked, his voice rougher than intended. Nikka simply nodded, accepting her fate with the dignity of her ancestors. As they rode away from everything she had ever known, she felt the rancher's powerful presence behind her like a storm gathering strength. The desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving, holding secrets that would soon unfold like a flower blooming in the darkness. The first chapter of their story had begun, written in dust and desire beneath the endless western sky. The Morrison Ranch sprawled across the valley like a kingdom carved from dreams and determination. Adobe buildings clustered around the main house, their red tile roofs gleaming like scattered rubies in the afternoon sun. Cattle dotted the landscape like dark clouds against golden grass, and the sound of running water from the artesian wells sang a song of life in the arid wilderness. Jake helped Nikka down from his horse, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessity demanded. The contact sent shivers through her body like ripples across a hidden pond, and she found herself studying his face, the strong jaw shadowed with stubble, the eyes that held storms and secrets. "Welcome to your new home," Jake said, his voice carrying an unexpected gentleness that contrasted with his reputation as the hardest rancher in 3 counties. The ranch hands gathered at a respectful distance, their curious eyes taking in the Apache beauty who had arrived like an answer to unspoken prayers. Among them stood Maria, the Mexican housekeeper whose knowing smile suggested she understood more about matters of the heart than she let on. "Senor Jake." Maria approached with the confidence of someone who had earned her place through years of loyal service. "I have prepared the guest room for the señorita." But Jake's hand on Nikka's lower back guided her toward the main house with an intimacy that spoke of different intentions. "She'll be staying in the master wing," he announced, his words carrying across the courtyard like a declaration of ownership. Nikka felt heat rise in her cheeks like desert sunrise, understanding the implications of his decision. The arrangement between their peoples had been clear. She would belong to him completely, in whatever way he chose to claim her. The thought made her pulse race like wild horses running free. Inside the ranch house, cool adobe walls provided relief from the blazing heat. Navajo rugs covered polished wooden floors, and the scent of leather and tobacco created an atmosphere of masculine comfort. Jake led her to a spacious room adjoining his own, where a copper bathtub waited filled with steaming water scented with desert sage. "You'll want to wash the trail dust away," Jake said, his eyes drinking in her exotic beauty like a man dying of thirst. "There are clothes in the wardrobe, my late wife's things. They should fit." The mention of his deceased wife created a moment of awkward silence, heavy with unspoken grief and complicated emotions. Nikka sensed the pain he carried like an old wound that never quite healed, and something tender stirred in her heart despite her circumstances. "I will honor her memory," Nikka spoke for the first time since leaving her tribe. Her voice like honey poured over velvet. Jake's breath caught in his throat at the sound of her musical accent, and he found himself studying the graceful curve of her neck, the way her lips formed words like prayers. "She would have liked you," he admitted, then turned abruptly and left her alone. As Nikka sank into the warm water, she felt the tension of the day dissolving like salt in rain. The soap smelled of lavender and promises, and she wondered what the night would bring. Through the thin wall, she could hear Jake moving around his room, the creak of leather as he removed his gun belt, the splash of water as he performed his own ablutions. When she emerged from the bath wrapped in a soft towel, she found a dress laid out on the bed, emerald silk that would complement her dark beauty like jewels against midnight sky. The intimate gesture of him selecting her clothing sent warmth spreading through her body like whiskey on a cold night. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Dinner is served," Maria called through the door, her voice carrying a hint of maternal concern. Nikka dressed quickly, her fingers trembling slightly as she fastened the tiny buttons. The dress fit perfectly, hugging her curves like a second skin and revealing just enough to make a man's imagination run wild as mustangs across open plains. When she entered the dining room, Jake was waiting, transformed from dusty rancher to gentleman in a clean white shirt and black vest. His eyes widened as he took in her appearance, and she saw his hands tighten on his whiskey glass like a man fighting for control. The evening had begun, and with it, the delicate dance of desire that would determine both their fates. Dinner passed in a symphony of stolen glances and carefully chosen words, each bite seasoned with the spice of anticipation. Jake found himself mesmerized by the way Nikka's lips curved around her wine glass, how her fingers delicately handled the silver cutlery as if she were born to elegance rather than raised in teepees and desert winds. "Tell me about your life before," Jake requested, his voice rougher than the whiskey burning in his throat. "What did you do among your people?" Nikka's obsidian eyes reflected the candlelight like stars in a midnight sky. "I was a healer," she replied, her accent wrapping around the words like silk scarves in a desert breeze. "I knew which plants could cure fever, which roots could ease a woman's monthly pain, which herbs could make a man's strength. return when age began to steal it away. The implication in her words hit Jake like lightning striking dry timber. His pulse quickened as he imagined those skilled hands working their magic, those knowing fingers exploring territories that had remained untouched since his wife's passing. The thought made his jeans tighten uncomfortably, and he shifted in his chair like a man sitting on hot coals. "Useful skills," he managed, his voice betraying the effect her words had on him, as if sensing his discomfort. Nikka smiled, a slow, mysterious curve of lips that promised secrets and satisfaction. "My grandmother taught me that a woman's true power lies not in her beauty, but in her ability to awaken the sleeping giant within a man's soul." Jake's fork clattered against his plate as her meaning struck home like a well-aimed arrow. The sleeping giant she spoke of had indeed been dormant too long, and her presence was stirring it to life with the force of a desert storm. After dinner, they moved to the veranda where the night air carried the scent of sage and possibility. Jake poured himself another whiskey while Nikka stood at the railing, her silhouette outlined against the star-drunk sky like a vision from his most forbidden dreams. "The agreement between our peoples," she said softly, not turning around. "I understand what is expected of me." Jake approached slowly, like a man walking toward his destiny. When he stood behind her, close enough to smell the desert flowers in her hair, he felt his resolve crumbling like ancient adobe in a flash flood. "And what do you think is expected?" he asked, his breath warm against her neck. Nikka turned to face him, her eyes holding depths that could drown a man's soul. "That I should satisfy the rancher's hunger," she whispered, her hand coming to rest on his chest, where his heart hammered like a blacksmith's anvil. "That I should tend to his needs as I would tend a sacred fire, with devotion, skill, and complete surrender." Jake's control snapped like a rope under too much tension. His hands found her waist, pulling her against him until she could feel every hard plane of his body, every evidence of his growing desire. "Nikka," he groaned, her name a prayer on his lips. But just as his mouth descended toward hers, a commotion erupted from the direction of the barn. Shouts and the sound of galloping horses shattered the intimate moment like a gunshot through crystal. "Boss!" called Tom, his foreman, racing toward the house. "Rustlers hit the north pasture. They've taken near 50 head. Jake cursed with words that would make a preacher blush, his body still thrumming with unfulfilled desire. Duty called, but his hunger for the Apache beauty burned like a brand against his soul. "I have to go," he said, his hands reluctant to release her. "But when I return, I will be waiting," Nikka promised, her voice carrying undertones that made his blood sing like wind through canyon walls. "And I will be ready to complete our arrangement." As Jake rode into the night with his men, the taste of almost kisses and the promise of passion yet to come drove him harder than any spur. Behind him, Nikka watched from the veranda, her hand pressed to her lips where his breath had warmed them, knowing that when he returned, the real dance would finally begin. The rustlers had unknowingly interrupted a seduction that had been building like storm clouds, but they had only delayed the inevitable. When morning came, the rancher and his Apache prize would finish what the desert wind had started. Dawn broke like a promise kept, painting the sky in shades of desire and redemption. Jake returned to the ranch as the sun climbed over the mountains, his clothes dusty from the night's pursuit, his jaw set with the satisfaction of justice served. The rustlers had been caught, his cattle recovered, but his mind had remained focused on the exotic beauty waiting in his house like a treasure beyond price. Nikka heard his spurs on the wooden steps and felt her pulse quicken like hummingbird wings. She had spent the sleepless hours preparing herself, bathing in water scented with desert sage, braiding wildflowers into her midnight hair, and donning the sheer nightgown she had found in the wardrobe, a whisper of silk that revealed more than it concealed. When Jake entered the house, he found her in the kitchen, grinding corn for morning bread with movements that were pure poetry in motion. The sight of her in the translucent gown, her bronze skin glowing in the early light, hit him like a physical blow that left him breathless. "You're back," she said simply. But her voice carried undertones that made his blood sing like wind through canyon walls. "The cattle are safe," he replied, his eyes drinking in every curve revealed by the gossamer fabric. "The rustlers won't trouble anyone again." Nikka set down her grinding stone and approached him with the fluid grace of a desert cat. Her hands found the buttons of his dusty shirt, her fingers working with the skill of a woman who understood a man's needs. "You're tired," she observed, her touch sending lightning through his weary body. "Let me tend to you." Jake's breath caught as she peeled the shirt from his shoulders, her palms exploring the landscape of scars and muscle that told the story of his hard life. When her lips pressed against a bullet wound near his collarbone, he groaned like a man receiving salvation. "Nikka," he whispered, her name a prayer and a plea. She looked up at him with eyes that held the wisdom of ages and the innocence of morning dew. "I know what you need," she said, her hands moving to the buckle of his gun belt. "My grandmother taught me the ancient ways of healing a man's deepest wounds." As his weapons fell away, Jake felt more vulnerable than he had since his wife's death. But Nikka's touch was gentle as summer rain, her kisses like healing balm on his scarred soul. She led him to his bedroom, where morning light streamed through lace curtains like blessings from above. What followed was a dance older than civilization itself, the joining of two souls across the divide of cultures and circumstances. Nikka's healing hands found every place where Jake's body held tension and pain, working magic that had nothing to do with herbs and everything to do with the ancient power of feminine wisdom. "You're so beautiful," Jake whispered against her throat, his voice rough with emotion and desire. Like a desert flower blooming after rain, their bodies moved together in perfect rhythm, like partners who had been dancing this dance for lifetimes. When the thunder finally rolled across the desert of their passion, it shook the very foundations of the ranch house and left them both trembling in its aftermath. As they lay entwined in the golden morning light, Jake traced patterns on Nikka's bare shoulder like a man memorizing scripture. "The agreement between our peoples," he said softly. "It was supposed to be about water rights and protection." Nikka smiled against his chest, her breath warm on his skin. "Perhaps the spirits had other plans," she murmured. "Perhaps they knew that two wounded souls needed healing more than our tribes needed treaties." Jake tilted her chin up to meet his eyes, seeing in their depths a future he had never dared imagine. "Stay with me," he said, the words carrying the weight of a proposal and a promise. "Not because of any agreement, but because you choose to." Nikka's answer came in the form of a kiss that tasted like forever and felt like coming home. Outside, the desert wind sang songs of new beginnings, and the ranch that had once echoed with loneliness now hummed with the music of two hearts beating as one, the Indian maiden. And the rancher had found something more precious than water or cattle. They had found love blooming in the most unlikely soil, proving that sometimes the best agreements are the ones written by destiny itself.